here. There we go. So welcome to week 7. Everybody's doing okay. I thought maybe we'd just do like a check-in to see how everyone's doing, see how the last couple weeks has gone, because it's been 2 weeks since we've been together. So why don't you guys kind of like just fill me in on how you're doing, if the grieving process is kind of like affecting your day-to-day, or like if that's kind of in your mind, or if you've been able to sort of compartmentalize it, like what's going on for you guys in terms of your own process. And then so we'll kind of just go around, let everybody do a check-in, and then I'll do a little bit of a lecture and kind of go from there. So Ace, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I guess for me, it's been helping. Just going through my relationship graph is what it's called, right? It hasn't been as stressful as going through that the first graph that I did, and I think it's a part of it is the healing is starting to take place, or it has started, but the progress has, I guess, it's more effective, or it's been a lot bigger than I anticipated it would be at this time. So I'm feeling good with my progress so far,
So is it that you feel like less reactive or less triggered, or more, you have more clarity? Like, how would you describe?
I guess it's just more of maybe an understanding from where they're coming from, also that their intention was not to hurt me, even though maybe I ended up getting hurt. But also there's I guess maybe just the writing of the things is helping too, just to get it out of my system. I guess one of it too, one of the artists that I would watch on YouTube would be Ed Sheeran. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Ed Sheeran. He mentioned that a lot of times his song come out, and after he's finished with it, he just crumples up the paper and he throws it away. But it's, for him, it's a way of therapy. So that's this class has been kind of like that for me, just getting my thoughts out. So, a lot of times writing it down and just breathing it out. I think the breathing has helped a lot, just being able to breathe things out and say, oh, okay,
Right.
Those things have been really helping me out.
Yeah, that's great. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay. Kenva, what about you? It's nice to see your little face. I don't always get to see you.
I'm doing really well. I think the last class I had been feeling weird about the process, because I thought like I would feel a little bit sadder, but I am starting to I'm feeling like I'm beginning to have closure with the whole situation. Because one of the biggest things I was dealing with my mom's passing was like these feelings of guilt. Not because I was the reason she had cancer or whatever, but I always wondered, well, what if I had done something differently? What if we hadn't gone to the doctor that particular day? Or what if we had noticed that she had maybe an infection before she had that last chemo treatment? Or, those what ifs. And, if this had been done differently, then things could have been different, kind of thing. But from the graph that we did, what I saw, I really saw that, I haven't really been putting my mom on a pedestal, and I haven't been, is the term demonizing?
Yeah.
I haven't demonized her. And I went through my childhood and I picked out all the things that were kind of low points for me. And there were a lot, but I still feel like I was able to get over everything, and that I love her, and the sum total of my relationship with her was good. And I just feel grateful for that time that I had with her, especially the last 9 months of her life when I was her caregiver.
Great. Oh, that's amazing. I'm glad thank you for sharing that. Great. Okay. Kimberly, what about you?
I'm feeling really good about the loss process. For me, it was, like I said, my parents' divorce. I am actually learning to see it more as a block that was holding me back from moving forward because I held on to that for so long. So I've been able to let go and realize that what I really need to do is just forgive them and know that it wasn't anything intentional, because I took it, I guess, because I was so young at the time. You know how sometimes you're like, you feel like you're the reason why your parents break up or why
Yeah.
something happens to your parents. And I had to reflect on that. And I think that's kind of what I was holding on to. Because I always thought it was my fault, and there was absolutely nothing that I did that that injured the relationship for them. It was them just growing as an adult. Now I understand they grew apart. They were high school sweethearts, so they had been around each other for years and years and years. And even to this day, they're actually still friends. So I realized that probably about a month or two ago that their relationship was their relationship and not my relationship. So doing the loss graph, that kind of helped me, put that in perspective. And then also the flip side of it, it helped me to use their breakup as motivation for my marriage. This year makes 20 years that I've been married. And I always remembered when I got married, I said I would never get a divorce, no matter what. We would communicate, we would talk, all these things. And I think holding on to that divorce from my parents encouraged me to keep my marriage, with the help of God, going and strong. So it had a double meaning to me, to move me forward with what I'm doing with my marriage and my family, but then also teaching me that I need to forgive them, because there is nothing that I could have done as a kid that would have caused them to break up. And they both have told me that through the years, like, no, it wasn't your fault. We just didn't get along anymore. This happened. And I actually know what actually happened, the miscommunication from my mom and my dad. And I remember that. But, also, Kathy, something else I thought about, my dad brought me into their what was going on with them too early. I was 14 years old. And as a child, and I know this now, there's some things you shouldn't share with your kid that young about your relationship with their parent, because it kind of like imprints in your mind, almost like so I resented my mom for a very long time from what my dad would say and what I would see. And then later it started to ring in my ear like, oh, she's the bad person and this is what happened. And da, 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 da. So our relationship was warped because of that. So reading the book and just doing the loss graph, and I was like, that had nothing to do with me. But I feel like I shouldn't have known the intimate parts of their relationship that early in life. And that has been what I've been holding on to and haven't been able to let go. And now, since I'm in this class, I'm learning to respect my mom more, listen more. Not that I've disrespected her, but I also always kind of held this thing like, you're the reason why you and dad broke up, that type of thing. So this class is helping me in that realm to see the forgiveness I need to have for my mom and for my dad. And then it's also encouraging me to stay to stay together with my husband. So, yeah.
Wow, that's a lot. That's amazing. Isn't that amazing how when you start reaching you get perspective, you get clarity when you have a method to process it, like some kind of a structure to start to kind of work through it. That's so awesome. Wow, Kimberly, that's great. Thank you for that. Whew. Susan.
Well, I'm texting with your daughter-in-law.
Oh!
No, your stepdaughter, and my daughter-in-law. Sorry.
Tell her we're in the class.
I told her we just got back from Houston,
Okay.
just an hour or so ago. We've been
Oh,
gone for over a week. Kirk
okay.
taught the SHBI classes down there and everything. So we're trying to organize things and such. Anyway, it's been great. And I have been able to compartmentalize um, the thoughts I were having because of being with so many different people. But it's interesting, as always, when God brings you to a place, he has people, he puts people in your life to that are dealing with some of the same issues. And I was able to say, well, let me just tell you, in our class, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh man, even that helps me, just talking to people. And that's what I was wanting. I didn't realize had this, my dad's death, it had affected me throughout my life, and that I needed to deal with that. Is I had always wanted to be able to answer people who are going through some really deep grief. I have a very close friend whose husband just passed a couple of months ago. And so, it's just,
Mm.
yeah, to be able to say or to not say the right things and everything. So God was very good. And I was able to compartmentalize my thoughts, because I've been thinking about this, the feelings graph or whatever, that we were supposed to be doing for homework. And but the times I was able to think about it, I just felt such a relief. And that just the realization of needing to grieve my daddy, and the relief of getting the opportunity to do that.
Mhm.
And I know it was years ago, but it's just, yeah, I just feel such joy as I go through my thoughts about him and dealing with it. And I just feel like a relief. Yeah, I just feel it. And it's probably a healing, right? Kathy, you would say that a healing is taking place because there was a emptiness there perhaps, or something, and it's healing. And I don't know, growing up, I don't
It's
know how to say
it's
about it, what
funny.
to do.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. So I look at it like the word that I use
Yeah.
is integration, right? I feel like the purpose of doing any kind of our own work is so that we have the opportunity to integrate all of the parts of us.
Yeah.
And I think that when we grieve, a lot of times we're in survival mode, especially if you're grieving the loss of your parents' marriage, or like there's a divorce, a loss of a parent. For you, Susan, you had so many different balls up in the air that you were trying to manage, right? It's like when we get too overwhelmed, we go into survival mode, and parts of us, I think, splinter off just because that's just what it takes to be able to be in the moment and survive and to move forward and do the things we have to do. But in the process of that, I think we do lose parts of ourselves. We kind of set them aside. And I think it's very subconscious. It's not intentional, right? But at some point, when we go back and we retrieve parts of ourselves, kind of like what we're all doing through grieving, is it creates this integration, and we become healthier, we become more whole and more complete. That's why I love they use the words completing the loss, because as we complete loss, we actually do become more integrated and complete within ourselves, because we're not using all this emotional bandwidth to get through day to day, right? Because we all get triggered on some level or another, and it takes energy to manage the things that trigger us. But if we don't have things that are triggering us because we've completed the process, then that leaves that much more emotional energy to be available to enjoy the good things that are out there, that we're not taking so much of our energy to manage, I guess. And so I love that. It can feel like a relief. It can feel like you're getting healthier. It can feel like you're growing up. I know, because that little girl in you that didn't get a chance to grieve losing her dad, is having an opportunity to do that. So no matter
Right.
it doesn't matter how old you are, right?
Right. And
So
I just want to say the breathing that you taught us at the very last,
Mhm.
That has been great.
Mhm.
Super good. And since that time, I've read 2 articles, just was reading along about something else where they talked about breathing and how important that is. And like how in like if in a like a car accident or a something where the police are involved, the police are being taught to help the individuals that are in the accident or whatever to breathe instead of like me when I was in a car accident, I just cried.
Yeah.
It would have been nice for them to say, just
Right.
breathe, you're okay. They were kind and they told me good words, but if they'd said to breathe and they talked about um how that helps in so many areas of your life when you're breathing, when you learn to breathe and slow down your heart and stop it from going out of control,
Right.
in a traumatic situation or any kind of situation. Anyway, I just thought that
Yeah.
was really good too.
And I think I love that point. Like, and I don't know, for you, like, Kimberly, are you familiar with Body Keeps the Score? Are you familiar with that book? Yeah, by Vandercook. Yeah, it's just, we are so integrated, like we're integrated human beings, body, mind, soul, and spirit. And we can't splinter off one part of us. And I think, growing up with, especially you're in my generation, Susan, it's like, I don't think even professionals and people in the medical or mental health community, they didn't look at a person as the whole person, right? It was like, oh, well, you're going to a medical doctor, so we're just going to handle medical concerns, right? You're going to a mental health professional. Okay, we're just going to look at like a mental health concern, right? So it's like, I think now we're sort of learning that the body is so integrated that one part affects another part and they're intricately related. And so I think that's why breathing, it is related to our physical well-being or our ability to be in a traumatic situation, right? But I think we're still kind of really learning how to integrate those concepts overall. But in grief, it's so important because if we've been traumatized by a loss, it's natural to sort of like lose our ability to logically function. We kind of flip our lid, kind of what we've talked about, right? And that trauma piece kicks in, and then we don't have the ability to think clearly or to make sense out of things. So I think to Asa's point, like being able to have a structure to be able to work through the things that we're processing, get it out, externalize it, write it down, be able to see it on a graph. Like those things are really important because you're engaging all those different parts of yourself, physical, emotional, and the breathing is just, another really vital part of that. So yeah, it's amazing how in one of my grad classes, we had to practice deep breathing. We had to do it 3 times a day and then record like sort of the benefit that we got from it if we noticed any changes or differences. And it was amazing to see how just doing it like just really short 3 times a day, how much more clarity and bandwidth you have to deal with the things you have to deal with. Yeah. Yeah. Susan, do you integrate any of that kind of breathing, any of that with your students when you do speech therapy?
Yes, we did that a lot with kids who are having meltdowns,
Yeah. Okay.
the autistic children or others as well. They weren't necessarily autistic. I did it with kids who were learning to um, control stuttering. We did a lot of breathing with stutterers. Let me see. I did a lot of things using whole body.
Mhm.
Like if for a stutterer, for instance, they had to either march in place and say their words or tap out their words,
Ah.
just getting their speech to slow down, and they use their whole body. My little boys, we used kung fu or karate chops,
Is that like
that kind of thing.
to help with the right brain, left brain
And just to,
motivation.
for them to be aware. And then we have I had lots of kids that didn't talk in complete sentences. They would leave out verbs, or they would talk too fast and leave out. A lot of kids leave out articles, you know, the and in
Mhm.
their speech, and it sounds real choppy. We talked about, you know, saying each word or we'd march, and you know, they've just learned through the years. I learned through occupational therapists and physical therapists, like if I'm trying to get a kid to say an S sound, I don't just go.
Mhm.
They lay on the floor and act like a Superman to be able to say the S, you know,
Right.
just getting the whole body involved. So
Mhm.
yeah, we did breathing. I did a lot of breathing, mainly though with kids having meltdowns and stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if they had not been taught that, they resisted that. The thing that we found best is coloring. If I could get them to sit down and just color, they'd calm right down.
Mhm. Mhm.
That-
Yeah.
And that's probably something, that's one of my, you know, every child's different. Totally different. And what technique worked for every child was different. Some just need to be held real tight or feel the pressure. You know, I'd go behind them and push down real hard on their shoulders, and they just need that pressure. And then immediately, oh, or then those that were nonverbal would grab my hands and put them on on his shoulders. But
Wow.
yeah, I hadn't
Fascinating.
thought about all that, but yeah.
Yeah, it shows like that integration, that need for it to
Uh-huh.
integrate all of the parts of the body. That's
And
amazing.
that's something in the last few years that they've really realized. Used to be speech pathology was over here, occupational therapy's here, and physical
Yes.
therapy's here. Now we all work together,
Mhm.
especially with those children that are extremely involved with a lot of different issues.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's
Oh yeah, I'm sorry I talked too much.
really interesting. No, not at all. It's nice we have a small class. Okay, so am I missing anybody that hasn't checked in? Okay, I didn't think so. All right, I just want to make sure. So the next thing we're going to do with your relationship graph is we're going to convert it into two recovery components. Okay. So what we're going to do is you're going to look at your graph, and then you're going to go through each entry that you have, and you're going to assign either an apology, a forgiveness, or a significant emotional statement. And this is in the book as well. Okay. So we're going to go through what those things are. You can assign one or all of them, depending on what the entry looks like. Okay. And the reason we're doing this, and the reason we have these categories, is because we want to give you guys like a way to convey an undelivered emotional communication, right? Toward the loss, the event. So we're going to convert each of the events on your relationship graph into a recovery component. Okay. So let's go over what those three areas look like. The first one is an apology. Okay. So I want to help you guys who are processing like things that you feel like you didn't do anything wrong, right? So in my case, right, I had processed the loss of my marriage, right? And I was the injured party. I was the one that got, I didn't really do anything to deserve what had happened to me, but it was a loss nonetheless. So I want to just tell you that an apology, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of, well, I don't have anything to apologize for, right? Because we all have at least 1% responsibility in every situation, right? Even in the most heinous of situations. So just don't tune out if I say apology, if you were an injured party, because we're going to talk about victimization a little bit later today. So for an apology, we make apologies for what you did or what you did not do that might have hurt someone else. You may need or owe an apology for something that you actually did, like I'm sorry for taking the money out of your purse, Mom. Or for something that you didn't do, I'm sorry I didn't visit you in the hospital. Okay, so it can be an apology for something that you didn't do or something that you actually did. It says, we're concerned about the perception of your actions, not necessarily the actions themselves, meaning how you perceive an action or a non-action is what we're addressing, right? If you feel that you did something to harm another person, then that's the kind of thing that we want to help complete within your own perception, right? If it's something that you feel like you didn't do anything to harm somebody else, that's okay. Just put it down, and that's okay too. It's important in this process that you don't judge yourself, but that you just are able to look at your perception of what did or didn't happen, and you're able to kind of just get it out there, right? The objective in this process with the apologies is to become more complete, not to hurt yourself or to shame yourself. So you want to keep that in mind. You want to complete the unresolved relationship, but you don't want to judge yourself. Okay, so that's the apology. Let's talk a minute about victims and apologies. Some people, like we all know people that have this sort of this lifelong commitment to their pain, and they view themselves as a victim, right? And regardless of how maybe we were sinned against or how someone hurt us, we have to make the choice whether we're going to stay committed to our pain and identify as a victim, right? So, and we get to make that choice. And victims have a really tough time with apologies, right? It feels really risky to apologize. And so sometimes when we've been victimized, our memories sometimes can serve to give inaccurate pictures, and kind of keep us in that cycle of being hurt and being in our pain. Okay, so that's why in the text and in the material, we talk about having at least 1% responsibility, like maybe 0.5%, maybe 0.2% responsibility, right? We have some responsibility in our own in our own circumstance. So for instance, okay, so with my ex-husband, it's okay for me to look at my response, and no matter how overwhelmed I felt with the 5 kids, no matter how abandoned I felt, no matter, X, Y, and Z, I can say, I'm sorry for my lack of understanding for all that you were going through in your own suffering and pain. I'm sorry I wasn't more sensitive to that, right? That doesn't cost me anything, and it's very true, right? This was a person who was clearly in a lot of confusion, chaos, and pain, who had a pattern of living that created some victims as he moved on in his life, right? But it's okay for me to look at my own part as the other party and to own part of that. Okay, so I just want to challenge people who have been victimized. This is a really touchy thing because, we want people to advocate for themselves and to know that it's important for them to be protective of themselves, especially if they've been from, abusive relationships, or they had a parent that was abandoning, there's a lot of really painful things out there, but forgiveness is sort of, it's for our benefit. People always say that, right? But it is very true. But if we remain in that victim sort of identification, then it makes it really, really difficult to complete the loss. And that's the goal, is to complete the loss. People always say, you know, forgiveness is an action, it's not a feeling, you know, and that's, although that's very true, it's really hard to buy into that, right? But I love the way they describe it, because they talk about how forgiveness is giving up hope, giving up the hope of a different or better yesterday. That's how they describe it. Giving up the hope of a different or better yesterday. And I love that, because it's like we can choose to walk in forgiveness, but we have to give up the hope that something was different in the past. Right? Forgiveness is not condoning what happened. It's giving up the hope that something was different. Any memorized resentment of the past event will limit and restrict our ability to participate fully in life. Okay, I'm going to say that again, because to me, this is one of the most profound things about the grief recovery method, is any memorized resentment of the past will limit and restrict our ability to participate fully in life. I have 100 memorized things that I can lean on if I wanted to be resentful. But if I allow myself to do that, it would have limited my ability to love again, to be in relationship again, to have, you know, wonderful stepchildren and grandchildren, right? It would have restricted, if I had been invested in the memorized events that were painful and chosen resentment, I would have had no emotional availability to live my life in abundance. We relive unfinished emotions that are attached to resentful memories. We relive unfinished emotions that are attached to resentful memories. So if I have a memory that I have carried resentment, maybe the unfinished emotion is anger. Right? I relive that anger every time I go back and sort of relive the event that created the resentment. Does that make sense? Yeah. So successful recovery requires completion of the pain rather than the retention of the resentment. I'll say it again. Resentful recovery requires completion of the pain rather than the retention of the resentment. One of the things that is so profound, I think, within this method is that very that choice to stay committed to the painful event and carry resentment. So one of the ways that we handle this is by using a forgiveness statement on our relationship graph, if that's appropriate for that entry. Okay. So we have an apology or a forgiveness statement. Okay. And the third one that we can choose is a significant emotional statement. This is an undelivered emotional communication that doesn't fall within the category of an apology or a forgiveness statement. Right? Significant emotional statement can be, I love you. I hated you. I was very proud of you. I was ashamed of you. I was thankful for the sacrifices that you made. I appreciate the time you spent with me. Whatever you want to say, that's appropriate for that entry. And I love how, we're always emphasizing honesty, authenticity in this process, right? Sometimes if you had this really awesome dad, but there's an emotion that maybe that kind of like peaks up in you, and it's like, wait, I was really angry when my dad did this or that, or said this or that, right? And you kind of have this flash of, it's okay to put that in your, it's okay to assign something like that, because we don't want to deify, right? That's why we went through the deify and the demonization piece, right? Because sometimes it's both. Sometimes we have statements that we need to talk about, that we need to allow ourselves to forgive. And then we can also give an emotional statement. So it can be both, right? Or all three. There might be some kind of emotional statement you want to make, but you also have an apology and a forgiveness in there. Relationships are complicated. So you want to give yourself the ability to really work through each of your entries on your relationship graph and assign at least one of these three to your graph. Does that make sense?
To every entry, you assign one of these three in your graph?
Yes. And yes. So if you have an entry, Dad took me out for ice cream when I was 4 years old, and I remember that. Maybe that's one of the entries on your graph, right? Maybe that entry might be, thank you for caring enough to take me for ice cream. Okay, that's a significant emotional statement. Maybe you have an entry when you're 12 that your dad yelled at you, and you still today remember it at age 60, right? You might want to give a forgiveness statement. I forgive you for yelling at me that made me feel like I wasn't important, right? So you can see how throughout the relationship, there are going to be different elements of the relationship in each entry that might trigger one of these different interventions for you. Okay, they're giving you a tool to address different components of the relationship based on what you remember, so that you can fully complete the loss. Okay, because you're working with your relationship graph now, not your loss history graph. It's the relationship graph that we're taking. We're only focusing and emphasizing that relationship that you're processing. We're only doing one. We're not doing, several or more than one at a time. Thoughts, questions? You guys have your relationship graphs in front of you? Do you have them at your fingertips? Can you guys take a minute and see if you can do some of this in the present, like right now, and see how this applies? And if you would mind sharing it, that would be helpful, I think.
Kathy, where in the book was it where you were talking about the resentment, the statements about resentment. Where was that in the book? I can't,
I
I
believe.
know it's here in this chapter on forgiveness and the three things, right?
Uh-huh.
It's here with apologies, forgiveness, and
Oh,
emphatic and emotional.
that statement may not be in the book.
Okay, well, can you tell me that statement again? I tried
Yes.
to write it down as fast as I could go, but I missed it.
Yes, absolutely. So it's successful recovery requires completion of the pain rather than the retention of the resentment. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, now say it again.
Yeah. Successful recovery requires completion of the pain rather than the retention of resentment. Why do you guys think people hold on to the pain so much? I mean, we all know people that, have been divorced for 20 years and they hold on to that pain as if it was yesterday. Why do you guys think that is?
It becomes part of their identity, doesn't it? Or something like that. I mean, it's like a bondage they hold on to and they're afraid to let that go. It becomes so much a part of who they were, like for a divorced person or even someone who becomes a widow or widower, that becomes their identity. They don't want it to be completed because then what? They'd have to, I don't know if somebody else was talking, but they'd
I
have
think-
to go
I
on and
think
live
somebody
life.
is somebody needs to mute, not anybody on camera. We must have somebody else.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Anyway, isn't it kind of becomes their identity? So, like somebody who's a widower or a widow, or, they would have to complete and start living life alone. And that's real scary. So maybe it's fear that keeps them from and keeps them holding on to the bondage of whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like they identify with that painful experience so much that it sort of defines, and because of fear, they don't really want to move past it because you don't know what's on the other side of that. Why else do you think?
I think sometimes we hold on to things like that and compartmentalize them for some sort of control in the relationship later, or as like a dangling thing with that person. So I think some part of that empowers us, to hold on to so that we can have some leverage at times about different situations with that person.
Can you give us an example, Kimberly?
Let's say like if a husband cheats on a wife and he doesn't forgive, one of them don't forgive, and she won't let it go for a while, just so she can come back later, bring it back up again, and either make an excuse for why she's, mistreating him and, things like that. So from that perspective.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Great point. Yeah.
There's one thing that came to my mind. I remember when we were little kids that if me or my brother got into a fight, mom or dad would make us, hug, say sorry, hug, even if you didn't want to just yet, or even if you didn't want to. And so maybe it created somewhat of a definition, that could maybe suggest to a young person that in order to forgive, you have to go back into that relationship that you were in, which I don't think is the case,
Yeah.
So that might be the thing, says, no, I don't want to go back into that relationship. I don't want to forgive, because I think a lot of times we equate forgiveness into that,
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Like the potential of being re-victimized, right? Yeah. Right. That's part of the deal. If you forgive, that means that you have to be tied to this person in some way in the future. Yeah. Very true. Right. Okay. Yeah, I work with a lot of widows lately, and it's interesting how sometimes the pain becomes their only link remaining of with that person. And they feel like if they complete the pain, like if they give up the pain or go through the completion process, that they're losing that last piece of the person that they love, right? They've been with this person 30, 40, 50 years. And it's like, well, if I complete the relationship, if I deal with this loss and I give it the attention and time and the focus that you're asking me to give it, then I won't have that person anymore, right? It's sort of this all or nothing. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that not only do you still have a relationship with this person, but you have a relationship with this person that's balanced and accurate, right? It's not a relationship that's continually based around the loss and the pain. You have more space, more emotional space and availability to be in relationship with that person in terms of their memory, balancing all the different aspects of that person, right? The beauty of that person and the joy that they brought you. And like, it doesn't have to always be saddled with this incredibly painful reminder of the loss. It can be all of the above. But if we never complete that relationship in terms of the loss piece and the painful piece, then we are always stuck in this cycle of painful loss and hopelessness, because that person is not going to get to be in our lives. So we hyper focus on that one piece because we haven't been able to move beyond it and complete it. Right? It's really hard when you're older. My own mom, I was sharing with you guys, we lost my dad 2 years ago, and my mom is in her 80s, right? And the thought of not being in this painful place as she realizes that she no longer has him, it's sort of like, it's like she just comes up against this brick wall and there's nothing beyond it. Like there's no, you can't move over it or around it or under it. It's like the pain has completely, and the loss has completely defined the rest of her life in her mind. And I understand that, but I think that we can't make the choice to sort of brick by brick remove some of those pieces of that wall and make the choice to complete the relationship so that there can be more emotional availability to move beyond the pain. And that's kind of what this method is teaching you guys for your own benefit, but also as you help other people, is that it doesn't have to create this giant barrier to being able to move forward in your life. And at the end of the day, we all get to make the choice as to how we choose to handle our own pain. And I think that as a Christian, I think God wants us to live abundantly. He has so many beautiful, awesome blessings for us. I don't care if you're 85 or 25, as long as we're still breathing and we're here, God has something for us. And so I think it's important for us to open our hands and allow him to just fill it when we're ready, because he wants to do that. Right? So as you guys look at your graph, can you guys look at maybe one of the entries? I just want to do just a little piece so that you guys kind of get an idea. And as you think about an apology or a forgiveness or a significant emotional statement, can you apply one of those to something that's entered on your graph? And would you be willing to share it? Just one. Got one, Canva? Go ahead. Can you share one?
Okay, I'm going to share one of the positive ones. In the middle of my relationship graph with my mom, there is a time when I was in college and I was having some issues with my roommate, and I didn't really come out and say that to my mom when I was on the phone with her, but I think she could tell that I was unhappy about something. And then when she pressed me for more information, I told her what was going on, and she told me, I'm not there to help you. You're on your own now. You're growing up. You have to stand on your own 2 feet, and you have to stand up for yourself. So if something is going on, if things aren't right between you and your roommate, you have to talk to her. You got to say something about it. And so I put it on here as, what did I put it on here on my relationship graph as? Mom encourages me to stand up to my roommate. This was on my relationship graph. And for that, I said, thanks for giving me the strength to stand up to my roommate and recognizing the fact that I was unhappy.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
How does it feel to be able to do that with that one memory?
It feels pretty great because these are things you think in your head. And just like you were saying, like when I was growing up, I was discouraged from saying what I felt and displaying any kind of negative emotion. So I wasn't really allowed to express my anger or hurt. I was discouraged from crying, and I was discouraged from, even having like a face that seemed like it was not happy, basically. So to be able to actually put into words what I'm feeling, it's very freeing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you get the gift of yourself. That's what I call it. The gift of you. Right. Yeah. Beautiful. Anybody else? Go ahead, Susan. You got something.
This is, y'all are gonna laugh. But when I think about my daddy, that I really had a wonderful, wonderful daddy. But my very first memory, when I'm going to this timeline, this is always my first memory of anything with daddy. So when I was little, we lived way out on a farm ranch. We were first ones on the bus at 7, and last one's off at 5 o'clock. So we rode the bus all day. And on Fridays, I remember as a first grader, because we didn't have kindergarten back when I was little. So in first grade, we rode the bus. And I remember Mama putting us on the school bus and how scary that was. And so I imagine I sat with my brother and didn't talk to anybody. It was just all, on a big bus with a bunch of people you don't know for over an hour. Yeah, it's pretty scary.
Yeah.
But on Fridays, we would stop at a drugstore coming out of, I grew up in Happy, Texas. and it's a small town, and we stopped at the drugstore, and anybody that had some money could go in and get candy on Fridays. Well, I always forgot to ask mom and daddy, and I was too afraid really to get off the bus. I was afraid I wouldn't get back on time anyway, so I never even did it. Well, once I got to know people, one of my friends, one Friday, I don't know when it was in the year, but I know I was in first grade. We got to on Friday and we stopped at the drugstore, and she said, "Come on, you can come get something." I said, "No, I didn't bring you money." And they said, "Well, it doesn't matter." You know, she said, "It doesn't matter. You just go in there and tell them, put it on credit to your daddy, or put it on his credit. You know, not a credit card, but
Mhm.
you know, like he had a tab running there or something. Put it on credit." It's what I remember him saying. I was like, "What? I've never heard of that." "Oh yeah, you can do it. You can do it." So I got off the bus, went in with her, and picked out a big hunk. You know, that candy. I don't know if y'all remember that candy. And when the lady said, you know, it's $1.50 or whatever, I said, "Put it on my dad's credit," or whatever. And they said, "And who is your daddy?" Of course, everybody knows everybody. And I said, and then I went back and got on the bus, and I thought, wow, that was easy. Well, my parents had never told me about doing that. And when I got home, I had this big hunk. And I'm sure my big brother told on me or something. I don't know. Don't remember that part. But mom and daddy, I remember I was one of those little girls. I did get in trouble and get a spanking, but I was more of just horrified to upset them and would just immediately start crying. You know, "I'm so sorry." But I remember daddy was real frustrated about that. And I don't know what his thoughts were or anything, but he got on to me hard. And I remember that. And and to me, it's so great to be able to say, "Daddy, I am so sorry that I did that. I did not understand what that meant." And, you know, I never talked about that again. I was just mortified. I was embarrassed. I felt like I'd been tricked, you know, all those feelings. I still remember all those feelings, you know. And anyway, that's my story. Thank you. That was great to do that. I wrote that out. That's awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
He would die. He was so outgoing, so friendly. Everybody loved him. He would die laughing if he thought that it's bothered me all these years, you know. He'd
Yes.
say, "Oh, Susan," you know, but as a little girl, I just
Yes.
was horrified.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And how old were you?
I was 6. I was in the first
6.
grade.
6 years
Uh-huh.
old. Wow.
And then I will tell y'all this other one real quick. So when I was in college, I had 2 roommates and we were living off campus then. I think I was junior. And I lived with 2 sisters. One was in college with me and one was working. She had finished college and was working and in a department store. And or no, it wasn't a department store, it was just a store. Long story short, her coworker was murdered, stabbed to death in the shop one day. So we came home. She had gone back to she'd forgotten something in the store, went back to the store and it was locked. And she came home and said, I know she's in there. I don't know why she didn't let me in." So the police assumed that while she was knocking on the door, the murderer was stabbing her coworker. So she came home. She was really worried. She called that lady's husband, all this stuff. And we're all feeling real unsettled. Well, then the news came on, and it was all about her coworker's murder and how her husband, after my roommate called her husband, he went to the store and the door was unlocked.
Oh my
And he
God.
went in and found his wife. Oh, it's horrible, tragic.
Mm.
And it was weeks before they found the guy. So of course, all of our towns were terrified. But I remember calling my daddy, and he jumped in the car. I don't know what he was doing, but he was at my house, my apartment, in as fast as he could be there. And half the time, grabbed me and my roommates, put us in the car, and took us to my house and got them to their house. And he was just you know, such a caregiver, and he treated my friends as if they were his daughters as well. And they still all talk about that. So I talked about that too. Anyway, isn't that a crazy story? But that's in my mind. Anyway,
Wow. 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 Okay. What about you guys? Kimberly, do you have any? Or Ace?
I have not completed my relationship graph. I had some family over for spring break due to some sickness with my mother-in-law, things like that. So I'm not complete, and I want to be able to process it correctly before I share it.
Sure, of course. Yeah, totally understand that. All right. Ace, what about you? Do you have anything?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll pick up where Susan left off with something a little funny. Well, her first story was a little funny with Happy, Texas. I couldn't believe there's actually a town called Happy,
I know.
Texas. Yeah. Or
In
that's
West Texas.
yeah. Or that there was even a candy called Big Hunk, for- you know, for $1.50. That seems a little pricey. I remember when I was in middle school, 50 cents for a Snickers bar. It was a nice size Snickers bar. you know. but I guess I'll pick up there. And I guess I'll make a emotional statement. And this is gonna go to a girl that she was kind of like my first love here in the Philippines. I met her at an island, and I was just buying some desserts. They're called hopia, so it's a Filipino dessert, and she just kept smiling at me every day, and so I just kept going back every day. Things didn't work out, and so I guess my statement would be, I love you too. I'm sorry that things didn't work out between us, but when I came back, you left. You know, uh, but everything's good. I'm glad that we met because you were among my first friends when I came to the Philippines.
Mhm.
So so there. Yeah, so I guess our relationship and friendship first started over something sweet. It was a dessert. Later on, we came to have feelings for one another. I went off to another island on vacation with my family because they had come here to the Philippines. And by the time that I was coming back, she was getting ready to go to somewhere else to work. And I asked her, hey, I surprised her, because I knew she was going and we were going to have a hard time meeting up again. The day that I got back, I texted her, hey, wait for me, I'll see you tomorrow. I just got back. I'm really tired. I need to take a nap, but let's meet tomorrow. And it was that same day that she says, I have to go. I'm going to this other island. We're leaving today. And she writes, I love you forever,
Oh.
and yeah.
Oh. Wow.
Mhm.
What's it feel like to kind of relive that?
Well, it's been so long ago. This was when I first got here over 10 years ago. But there were a lot of happy memories there, also. So I guess that was some of the, I guess, more enjoyable times of my life here in the Philippines. But, before the romantic side, there was the friendship side too, just going there every day, talking and having fun and just things like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great example of you could be carrying the pain, right?
Mhm.
Of not being, not having a future with her, but I'm looking at you, right? And you have such joy. I can see the love and by remembering that and reliving it, right? And
Mhm.
it's just, to me, it's just a perfect example of letting go of the pain so that you have more emotional availability to be in the other parts of that relationship, the memories and the
Mhm.
joy that it brought you and the happiness. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. So it was Susan that made me think of the sweets, with the big hunk
Yeah.
candy. So
Okay, you guys, I'll share with you my life of crime. When I did this surrounding my dad, my loss of my dad. My dad was a very stoic person. He grew up with a really physically violent mom and dad, and he was the oldest of 4 boys. So they used to they were good people. They were Christians. They were very legalistic. And so I think it's kind of like, well, if we just, beat the bad out of you, then you'll be a good person, right? So I think their intention was wasn't horrible. They just had really bad parenting, right? So that's kind of where my dad came from. So he was not very emotionally emotive, right? He wasn't verbal about how he cared for me or my sister or even my mom. He was quite reactive in terms of, he was very explosive. But I think, a lot of that was because he just didn't have any other way of being able to communicate. And so I grew up very afraid of him. And so I'll tell you my life, but we had he never, he didn't hit us or anything, but the emotional reactivity was very scary, for a little kid. And we lived in Canoga Park here in California, and my friend next door, I would think I might have been 10 or 11. And my friend next door was 2 years older. So she and I wound up at a JC Penney down this, at the close to the local mall. And I stole a tie tack, one of those little tie tacks for my dad for Father's Day. And I don't remember doing it. I remember the incident, but I don't remember like what went through my mind. I remember her telling me, oh, you can just put it in your pocket or whatever, right? So, but the funny thing is the store security actually came and got us and took us up to the security office practically in handcuffs and called my parents. And so my mom came down and picked me up and took me home. And she's relaying, everything that happened to my dad. And I am just panicked, right? Oh my gosh, he is going to kill me, And of course, when you're little and you've never done anything that, kind of like Susan, kind of like what you're talking about, it's you don't really understand the implications of what's happening, And I mean, I knew it was wrong, so I wasn't confused about that, but the punishment in the store did not match the crime, should we say. And so I just think it's so funny because it was a tie tack and it was for Father's Day, receiving stolen merchandise. But anyway, but I'll never forget my dad's reaction, right? I was in tears. I was mortified. I mean, it was I was beating myself up. And he just said, "You're forgiven. We'll never talk about it again." That was it. And he never did. It was never brought up again. And it's interesting because throughout my life and my frustration with my dad, because of his lack of being able to verbalize, his feelings and tell you that he loves you. And every little girl needs to hear that. And I never really did. So, but his actions are what spoke volumes. And, I was a worship leader with my first husband, and I would sing and he would be in the back row in church just bawling. Every time I would sing, he would just waterworks. I graduated from college and waterworks, graduated from grad school, waterworks, so he clearly, felt what I wanted him to feel toward me, but he could never say it. And so doing this kind of work, it helped me remember that right? How awesome that he would just, "You're forgiven. We're not going to talk about this again." Didn't beat me up, didn't make me feel ashamed or guilty, And so having that ability to go back and reclaim that for myself just through that one interaction is like gold, right? And so as you guys go through your graphs, so that's my life of crime. So, but what's interesting is I always have this ongoing theme that I've done something wrong in my life. And I don't do things wrong. I mean, I'm hard on myself. And it's really weird how like I would have dreams that I've hurt somebody or that it's just really strange how sometimes some of that stuff comes back. And so as you do some of this work, especially if you're doing it from with a relationship that started at a very young age, like birth, like a parent, it's interesting to see what some of the threads are that go through that follow some of the narrative, right? The narrative is, oh my gosh, I did this horrible, terrible thing by stealing a tie tack. And the narrative of I'm a bad person, I've done something wrong, followed me for a really long time with no evidence to back it up. It was just my own perception of who I was. So the grief work, my point is that the grief work can like help you to go into different like avenues of your life, different threads of narratives in your life. And they are all connected on some level. So if you have any one little thing that kind of pops up for you, pay attention to it, jot it down, and then kind of see what comes up. As we kind of close out this next couple weeks, we're going to be working on letters, goodbye letters to the people, to these relationships that you've been working on. And so I want to kind of just tell you up front that the more you can put significant statements, apologies or forgiveness statements in your graph, it's going to help as you formulate your letter. So try to be as detailed with it as you can, just for your own memory, and then we'll go from there. So anyway, we have such a small class. We're done a little bit early. Actually, not really. 6:50. We're like 5 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to kind of convey before we sign off? No?
So for next time, do we have any homework for next time?
So your homework for next time is to go through each of the entries on your relationship graph and assign one of the statements, either forgiveness, apology, or a significant emotional statement. And do that for each entry on your relationship graph. Okay. And then anything else that comes up, go ahead and add it, as things come into your memory. You want it to be as complete as possible so that we can finish up the loss. And then what happens is, as you guys have kind of now are coming through this process, right? If you have other situations or losses that you want to process, like this is just one, you're just working on one, you can apply these same steps and principles to different losses as they come up for you, right? Like I haven't lost my mom, right? But if at some point when I lose my mom, I'm going to want to do this. I'm going to want to process my relationship so that I can eventually complete that relationship and that loss. So this is kind of always an ongoing thing as we move through our lives, because we always have losses of hopes, dreams, or expectations, and obviously people. So, and as our lives change and we get older, we have, we transfer, we move out, we move in, so I think that I'm teaching you guys the method so that you can apply it as you go through different phases of your life. And then obviously you can help other people too. Okay, you guys. Well, we'll stop 4 minutes early, and we'll see you guys next week. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank
All right.
you.
Good night.
Good
Bye,
week.
everybody.